Good evening. I am Lori Beth Huffman, the District Superintendent for the Appalachian District, and I welcome you tonight to our training webinar for trustees that are serving in the Appalachian District. Appreciate your time and being part of this webinar, as this is a new experience for us, but I want to share with you the folks that are helping to make this happen with me tonight. Off to my left, off camera, is Charlotte Brindle, the Appalachian District Congregational Vitality Strategist, and she will be receiving the questions that you email into us tonight. So please use the email address that is at the top of your handout that has the agenda on it, and she will feed those to me as the night progresses. And then I also want to say thank you to Chris Quinn and Bryce Holden, who are part of the IT team here at the conference office here in Charlotte, and they are helping us make sure that everything goes smoothly. So what we will do tonight, I will pretty much follow the agenda, and we'll talk a little bit about the makeup of the trustees, talk about your job description as the Book of Discipline outlines your responsibilities, and then offer some tips for success. And then sprinkled throughout that, I will take time to answer any questions that you all email in to me. I promise that we will get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. And if there are more questions than we have time to address, I will give a response to every single one of those as soon as I can. So let's get started. And let's talk first about the makeup of the trustees. And let me also say you should have 3 handouts. One that is the webinar handout with the agenda, one that says Board of Trustees, and it has the paragraph excerpt from the Book of Discipline, and then one that says a trustee's job description. And we're going to begin with the one from the Book of Discipline that says Board of Trustees at the top. And so I want to talk about who makes up the trustees. And this is a group that is lifted up by the nominations committee of the church. And in each church, there should be a trustees committee that consists of between 3 and 9 persons. And a reminder that this should include diversity across gender and age and ethnicity, if that is relevant within your congregation. It should, try and reach into different groups within the church, but it should also consist of people who have some skills to offer particularly to trustees. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. This is the one group, though, in the church where it is legal. It is okay for members to be present of trustees that actually are not members of the church. It says that 2/3 must be professing members of your congregation. So that means that 1/3 can actually be people that are not members. And sometimes that becomes relevant if the closest person to the church is not a member of the church, but sometimes they have a key and help with emergency situations. There are just some interesting reasons why it may be helpful to have a non-member serving on your trustees. Another thing to note is the pastor is not a voting member of trustees unless that pastor has been elected on the trustees as an elected member by your charge conference. Now, this is like most of our administrative teams. You should have classes of teams that rotate on and off on a 3-year term. That way you always have some experience. You have folks that can share the history of what projects have been done or work that has been done for the property and the building. And it also allows you to train some folks up to step in as the chairperson. Now, this is also a committee where the Book of Discipline does not put a term limit on trustees serving. In other words, the trustees can rotate back on for another 3-year term. But it says unless there is a reason that would prevent that. And that reason would be if your church comes up with your own policy. And I actually recommend that the church have a policy for term limits for pretty much all of your offices. It's just not healthy to have anyone serving in one position for many, many years. And so this is an opportunity for the pastor to work with your administrative council and your nominations teams, and then you can set up that maybe a 2-term limit is a max, or that someone can serve 1 term, rotate off for 1 year, and then they can come back on. There are different ways that you can handle that. As we move down the handout to paragraph 2530, it talks about then how do you organize yourself. And so this is also different from most of our other administrative teams. So when the charge conference elects the trustee members for the coming year, and you have your team of 3 to 9 people, then within the first month, the trustees are to convene, to meet, and then you will elect your officers. So the nominations does not select the chair of trustees. The nomination simply selects or lifts up the team that will make up the trustees, and then you have to elect your officers. And so typically you would elect a chairperson and a vice chairperson and a secretary. And in some cases you need to elect a treasurer, and the secretary and treasurer can be the same person. However, if you are incorporated, then the treasurer oftentimes will be the elected treasurer of the church. For legal reasons, their signature makes sense for whoever your elected treasurer is to be the treasurer for your trustees. It does not mean that they need to come to meetings and necessarily be part of that team. But if the incorporation has to handle documents or sign documents, that's the signature that you would want to use if your church is incorporated. So once you have elected officers, then you proceed just like all of our other teams. The Book of Discipline does recommend that you minimally meet once a year. I would strongly suggest that you meet much more frequently than that, so you can handle issues that do come up as in a timely manner. So if we move down to paragraph 2532, the interesting piece out of that paragraph, and this is important, people do ask, is what consists of a quorum as you are making decisions, and trustees are oftentimes voting on things where you need good minutes, good records, and a quorum consists of a majority of your elected trustees. So it is not a majority of who has shown up for a meeting. If you have 9 members on your trustees, then you have to have 5 present, 5 to hold a quorum. And so that's important because sometimes you may not have enough people present to make an official decision. And so make sure you're attending to that detail when you are voting on really important and significant or expensive things that are going to cost money decisions. So when we get to paragraph 2533, this then begins to lay out what are the primary responsibilities and duties. And so I do hope and ask that you will take the time to read this document in its entirety. I'm not going to go through it word for word, but I do want to pause and just lift up a few important things here. And, the main point is that you as trustees are responsible for supervising and overseeing and caring for the property that belongs to the church and maintaining the equipment that is used within the church. And so there are lots of ways to kind of live that out. And we will talk about ways of interpreting that as more than just fixing what is broken, but also really thinking about the building as your very best ministry tool. And it is. Your building, your facility is the best tool that you have to do ministry, to reach people, and to serve the community. And so the condition that it's in or the way that you prepare it for ministry really, really counts. And you as the trustees are the primary folks to make sure that the facility is ready to serve. A couple of things that I want to lift out of here that I think are interesting. Trustees are empowered to care for the property, but it is important that you realize that you are not to interfere with the work and the ministry of the pastor in doing religious services and religious ministry. And so you do have to coordinate what you are doing with, obviously, the work and the ministry of the pastor and the church. You also are the ones that decide who can use the church facility. And so if there are any questions about an outside group, you need to have a policy in place that helps you make those decisions easily rather than waiting for a request to come in and then being confused about whether this is an appropriate request or not. And the Book of Discipline suggests that you refer to the social principles as a guide for what groups that are out there that would be acceptable to use the facility. And that can be found in paragraphs 160 through 166 in the front part of the Book of Discipline. It's actually a very interesting section that you might find interesting to see what the United Methodist Church believes and what we hold up to be important in our world today. The one funny thing, and this is true with the Book of Discipline, it absolutely is true with Scripture, that a lot of times when I read it, there are things that I see for the first time, even though I've read passages over and over and over again. And so today, or this weekend, I learned something or saw something I'd never seen. But at the very end of 2533, number 1, it talks about how the pews in the United Methodist Church shall always be free. And that tickled me at first. I'm like, what in the world? But I get where that's historically comes from. Particularly early on when this country was forming in churches, it was very common practice for some of the best seats in a sanctuary to be bought by the richest people in the church. They could buy their box or their seats, so they would have their guaranteed place to sit and the most prestigious place to sit. And this is very important that our church says absolutely none of that. All of the seats are available for everyone. Now, I know and you know that that isn't exactly true, because sometimes people have their seats in the pew, and as a guest, when I come to visit, I try and be careful because I don't want to sit in anyone's seat. But anyway, just a little interesting tidbit there. So as we move on, you will see that number 2 is also tied into your charge conference, but the Board of Trustees are supposed to review annually the insurance liability to make sure that you are covered for both your property and also your personnel, to make sure that you have all of the coverage that you need to protect you against any risks that you may have. And that is related to an annual review that you should do and take care of and work with your insurance agent on. Number 3 talks about granting permission for outside organizations, which I've already covered. Number 4, I think, is also interesting to lift up. That this past fall, I asked the chairperson of trustees, the parsonage committee, the pastor, and the staff parish chairperson to do a walkthrough for all of those churches that have a parsonage. And I want to say thank you very much for the excellent reports that I received and the diligent work that was done that I suspected was unusual for most churches, that usually it's just the parsonage chair and the pastor. But you will notice here that this is actually an expectation of you as the chair of the trustees to do every year with those folks. And then number 5 is another important responsibility of trustees. And this paragraph talks about you are the ones who receive and administer any bequests that are made to the local church. So any financial gifts that are given, or property, or tangible items that someone wants to give to the church, you are responsible for receiving that gift, deciding whether you want to receive that gift, and how it will be handled, unless it's a financial gift that's given with specific requests or limitations on those funds. And so some churches decide, or the administrative council decide, that they want to set up a permanent endowment committee to handle that. So if that's the case, then you as trustees may not actually be responsible for that, that there's another committee that should have at least a couple of trustees that serve on it to handle that responsibility. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well in a minute. And then the final thing is, every year you should be doing a walkthrough of your facility to do an annual audit of accessibility. Can folks get in and out of your church? Is everything safe? Can persons with disabilities access your church? And if not, what can you do to make that easier for them? So that kind of breaks down some of the primary responsibilities. You also have a trustee's job description, and if we could look at that for just a minute, then I'm going to stop and answer some questions. So a lot of this we've already gone over, but I do think the first couple of paragraphs are important for us to pause and just lift up for you. So it talks about what's my job, and it says effective trustees are Christian stewards of the property God has entrusted to the congregation. Effective trustees supervise and maintain the property of your congregation to ensure that disciple-making ministries of the congregation are effective and that local legal requirements related to the property are satisfied. And that really does sum up the big picture of what you're asked to do. So some good spiritual gifts for folks to serve on trustees: servanthood, the gift of helps that are just willing to pitch in and do whatever is needed. The gift of administration is very helpful, the gift of giving, and the gift of evangelism, so that you can recognize that your facility is an important evangelistic tool. And then having experience and skills. That is helpful to have folks that have knowledge and skills around property ownership and management, that have asset management to know how to handle funds and the financial aspect of managing the church, and who also can listen and communicate well with the people in your church, so you can hear what are their needs or hopes or concerns and be willing to be a partner with them to help meet those hopes and concerns. And then you will see the only responsibility that I didn't mention earlier is the next to last one, that trustees are to ensure that articles of incorporation of the congregation are kept up to date if in fact your church is incorporated. So let me say about that, several years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, there was a strong push that every church needed to be incorporated. And now it's actually a mixed bag. And so what I would say to you is it's a decision that you and your church need to decide what is best for you. And talking to an attorney will help you make that decision. There are costs involved with incorporating, and there's some legal aspects of it that can be helpful to a church, but some churches feel like it is not worth the expense to go through the incorporation. And so my advice to you is there are some resources on our conference website that you can look at to gather more information, but the best resource is to talk to an attorney and find out what would be the pros and the cons in your specific situation. So, actually, if you'll flip over the job description, I just want to point out that at the bottom, there are several resources that you may find helpful to refer to and get more information that can help you also continue your service as a trustee. So, let me stop and answer some questions. Can a trustee chair succeed his or herself as chairperson? And the answer is yes. There isn't a term limit for the chairperson unless your church has set a policy that has set a term limit to serve on trustees. But someone can serve 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years if they want to come in right off the bat and serve as a chairperson. The second question is, what is the purpose of the treasurer on the board of trustees? I think some churches have some separate funds that they operate out of and that they might fundraise for, and so having a treasurer to track expenditures related to the building may be helpful to them. That is just an option. It is easier if you can run everything through the church and just communicate well with your existing church treasurer. So it is absolutely not necessary or required, but in some situations it just might be easier logistically for you to track your expenses. Okay, so it looks like I've either already answered some of the questions that we received, or we're waiting for you to send some more. So let's move on to some tips to be successful. And that's your third handout. And there's several things here that I just want us to talk about a little bit tonight and really challenge you to think about in terms of how you understand and perceive the role of trustees in the life of your church. So first of all is remember that the building belongs to God and not to the members. And this is really important because sometimes we get very possessive with property, with our stuff, and with our things. And so when we talk about then how we're going to use the church facility and the church building, sometimes people have ownership and they don't want things to change. They don't want the facility to change. And yet, when you're looking at the vision and the ministry of the church, sometimes you have to change the property in order to better do the ministry that you're trying to do. And so continue to remind yourself that it is not an individual person's property, that building is a tool, is an instrument of God, that it belongs to God. And so I do want to pause here and talk a little bit about some of the logistics around property, because this has come up before. And I think it's important for us to understand how the United Methodist Church works in the way we're organized. And it talks about the trustee. You hold this property in trust. You are entrusted to care for this property on behalf of God and on behalf of the United Methodist Church. And so we have what is called a trust clause in the United Methodist Church, and that is talked about in paragraph 2503. And so as long as a church is functioning as a United Methodist Church, then you are taking care of the property and the building and attending to what is needed. But if a church reaches that day where they are no longer able to function as a church, for whatever reason might lead them to that very unfortunate day, then the way we are organized in this connective United Methodist system is that church property then reverts back to the United Methodist Church, the denomination. And so then the United Methodist Church determines what happens to that property if it ceased to exist as a United Methodist worshiping congregation. And so, it's important for you to understand that that's just how we have been organized for years. I was reading a deed from the early 1900s, and that trust clause was in there even then for the Methodist Episcopal Church South at the time. And so this is not anything new. This is how we as United Methodists and the Methodists, even before we were united, have operated for years. And so I think that's important for you to understand. There's also one other thing before I move on to the next tip, that if you are part of a charge or a cooperative parish or a multiple point charge, you may organize yourselves in a couple of different ways. There should still be a board of trustees for each individual church because you've got to maintain your individual property. But you can set up a multiple point charge, a board of trustees for that charge, and they can handle making property, maintaining a care of that property together. And then if property is going to be bought or sold that affects the charge, then there will be a church local conference that is set up of members from both churches that would be like the church conference to make a decision on approving whether to build or purchase land that would affect the whole charge. And so that's just paragraph 2527 and 2528 talk about how you tweak things when there's more than one church involved. Okay, sorry about that. Let's move on to number 2, which I think is just really interesting for us to talk about. First of all, spend the money necessary to maintain your facilities. Do what you need to do to take care of it, to keep it up. As I've said before, it's it is your best tool of ministry. And I promise you, it makes the first impression when a guest walks through your doors, is how your facility is being attended to. And sometimes those first impressions, you cannot recover from them if they don't go well, and guests will not come back. And a facility oftentimes, most times, makes a first impression even before your people do. So no matter how warm and friendly and absolutely wonderful you are as a church, if they've had a bad experience coming from the parking lot into the sanctuary, they may have already turned away from your church. And so I strongly suggest that you do a walkthrough and really think in terms of, literally, from the parking lot, what does it take to get into your church and into the sanctuary where the person will be worshiping with you? Is it easy? Can they figure it out? Is there good signage that tells them where to go? I worship at a different church every Sunday, and I can tell you I have a variety of experiences. And I think I've written about this in my email blast, but at least twice in the last year and a couple of months, there have been 2 times where I've literally held my breath as I opened a door because I had no idea what I was going to be walking into. I could hear music going on the other side, and I didn't know if I was coming into the front of the sanctuary or the back of the sanctuary, and how embarrassing it is to come in when you're a guest in the front and everyone's staring at you. There have been times when I've gone to what looked like the door I should go into, and it was locked. That looked like it would go right into the back of the sanctuary, and it was locked. But I didn't know that there was another door I should be entering in because there wasn't signage that pointed me in that direction. So a really good practice would be one of 2 things, or both. First of all, find a non-member, someone who is not familiar with your church at all, and have them do a walkthrough with you. Have them practice and see if they can figure out how to get from the parking lot into your sanctuary. Have them come and visit and worship on a Sunday morning, even better. They can give you a lot of good feedback. But another thing you can do is, as a committee, do a walkthrough all around your property, but take on different roles. So one of you could pretend to be a mother, a young single mother with a young child, and think about what it would take to access the bathrooms, the nursery, worship with a child. Someone could pretend that they have a disability to seek. If they're in a wheelchair, can they access the building very easily? What roadblocks do they come into? And just think of different guests and new people and try and be in that mindset as you walk through and look with new and fresh eyes. Because I promise you, guests will see spider webs that you have walked by for months now, and they'll see them. Other key places to make sure you pay attention to: the parking lot, signage, bathrooms. Bathrooms are really important, particularly for women. And if the bathrooms aren't clean, and if they don't smell good, and if they don't look welcoming, then it is a problem with impressions. And then nursery is another really key place. And you think about it, if you are going to leave your child in a strange place with people that you don't know well, you are going to be checking that nursery out very, very carefully. So it needs to look fresh and clean. It needs to smell good. It needs to be up to date and not be everyone's kind of tossed off old toys. It needs to be up to code. There have been places where I've been where it was very obvious the cribs were so old they were not up to code. That nursery needs to be well taken care of, and you as trustees can work with the children's ministry to make sure they have everything they need to have a top-notch nursery. Otherwise, you're communicating to people you don't really care about children and that young families are not important to you. I know otherwise, because I hear that more than anything else. We want families with children. Families with children. Well, go check out your nursery and see what kind of condition it's in, and that will tell you the message you're sending to actual families with children. Okay, number 3, a good practice is to set aside money for major repairs on a regular basis, just like you would do for your own home. You should do this not only for the church, but also for the parsonage. And this is just very good financial practice and planning, because the reality is you don't know when the HVAC is necessarily going to go out, and that is a top dollar expensive item. Or you may have a roof that is getting near the time for replacement, but you don't know when it's going to fail, and you've got to have a lot of money for that. And so every year you need to budget money for repairs, but you should also budget some money to go into a building repair fund. And then that way, each year, if you squirrel a little bit away, then over time, you've got a little pot of money to handle those expensive repairs and replacements that you know you're going to have to do at some point in time. Same thing with the parsonage. It's just good practice. Regular meetings will help keep the facilities in good condition. If you're not meeting, you're not talking about it, you're not handling the things that need to be attended to. Like I said, it's more than just fixing what's broken, but there's some places where even the things that are broken don't actually get fixed, and you really want to make sure that everything is in good working condition. And the only way you can keep a pulse on that is by regular meeting. Be willing to adapt facilities to ministry needs. This is just key in recognizing that the facility is a tool for you to use. So if the church is talking about adding a worship service, then you as trustees should be right in on that conversation. What do we need to do to make that work? What adjustments do we need to handle? What tweaks? What do we need to do to make a new worship space? If you have new ministry initiatives, or you have Sunday school classes with various sizes that are, maybe one is growing and one is shrinking, but the one that's shrinking is in the biggest room, then you as trustees can help have a conversation of how do we use our facility to best serve the needs at hand. How can you be part of that conversation that helps fulfill the mission and ministry of the church that the pastor and the leadership are so trying to strive to meet? And that means that you as trustees need to know what the vision and the mission and the goals of the church leadership is. Number 6, be willing to build or sell or relocate if it would help you reach more people for Christ. Because the bottom line is, that's the most important thing. That's what we're all about, is reaching people for Christ. It is not taking care of ourselves. And I think sometimes we get that reversed. But if the goal of the church is to reach more people for Christ, then sometimes you have to sit down and really assess, is our building our biggest setback? Is it our biggest limitation? What do we need to do to reach more people? Is our location just in the complete wrong place, and that if we could relocate somewhere, we would have more traffic or we would be more visible? Is it time to build? Have we grown? Is there a ministry need that we really can't reconfigure existing space and we need to think in terms of building something new? You need to be part of that proactive part of those kinds of conversations. A piece of that I didn't talk about earlier is how you interact with the district church location and building team. So anytime there is property that is sold, if you've got a large amount of property, then you may want to, there may be a lot of reasons why you might want to sell some of that, or you may be purchasing property, or someone may be giving you property that is adjacent to the church. You need to work with me and the district church location and building committee to make sure you get approval. And the sole purpose of that church location and building is just a check and balance to make sure that an individual church doesn't make a decision that is going to put them in financial stress, that is not a good decision ministry-wise. It's just a fresh pair of eyes and ears to assess a proposal to make sure that it's going to be a wise investment. And if it's new construction, they look at blueprints to make sure that everything is being built up to code of what the United Methodist Church requires or recommends, and that everything is progressing as it should. So they're there to support and encourage and offer helpful advice. And so a lot of times we can get our work done by, if you email me what you need them to approve. If you are building and you have plans, then you're probably going to need to come and meet with us in person. Okay, so let me get to another really important topic, and that's bequests and gifts that come to your church. So hear me when I say, you do not have to accept every gift that is given to your church or that someone wants to give to your church. I know sometimes we think, oh wow, someone's being generous, we need to take whatever someone wants to offer. But sometimes it becomes a liability and you become more limited because of the gift than you were without it. And so I strongly encourage you to take the time to think through, what does this gift mean for us? Is it going to help us further our ministry or not? And that's true with financial gifts, if they come with strings attached, and it's certainly true with tangible gifts that folks want to offer. Be mindful and discerning about what is really going to help further your goals and mission as a church. And then the flip side of that is when someone is ready to give a gift that the trustees discern that you're going to receive, then help them understand that once they give that gift to you, they no longer own it or control it. They have given it to the church, and now the church will decide how best to use that gift for its ministry and mission. And having really good communication up front and even policies of how you're going to handle making decisions around those gifts. Will plaques go up or not? If you can have a policy about that and communicate it ahead of time, you can save a lot of hurt feelings down the road when folks have certain expectations about gifts that they have given that you may not want to have to abide by, because again, it limits you. Now, if a financial gift is given with an earmark or a special, what am I trying to say? It's given with a specific use in mind, then that gift has to be used in that way. The only way you can use it in a different way is to go back to the person who has given the gift and ask permission that maybe something else has come up, and would it be okay with them to use the financial gift in another way. Otherwise, earmarked gifts have to be used in the way that the giver has requested. Number 9, we're about to wrap up here. Understand your role with administrative council. And you are responsible for maintaining and upkeeping the building. And so there is plenty work there where you do not need to be micromanaged by administrative council or even finance. And you just go about the routine work of taking care of the facility. But if there is a decision that you want to make that's going to institute a significant change in the way that things are done or affects the administration of your church and its ministry, then you need to take that as a recommendation to administrative council and get their approval. So you want to work with administrative council. Again, you don't need to be micromanaged, but you also want to make sure that you communicate well with what you're thinking about doing. And if there's ever a question, run it by the administrative council chairperson and make sure that, see if they want to have a larger conversation. And of course, the pastor can also help discern when it is best to have a larger conversation than for trustees to just go and decide to do something without consulting with the rest of the church. Just know that ultimately you are accountable to the administrative council, church council, for all administrative decisions. And then finally, your charge conference forms. Trustees don't have a whole lot of administrative work, but what you do have is really important. And there are essentially 2 forms. One is the report of the trustees, and this is where you respond or report back to the church that audit on the facilities, whether they are handicap accessible, and it's where you report on the insurance coverage that you have checked to make sure that it is up to speed and that there are no other needs that need to be addressed, that you have worked with your insurance company Also, it's a chance to kind of list what your assets are. So my advice is, because I know what happens, a lot of times you just copy in the numbers from the year before and turn it back in and sign and date it. But before you do that, we just make sure that the numbers are accurate, that everything is up to date. And then the other report is, if there is no parsonage committee, then the trustees are responsible for submitting the parsonage committee report each year. So it looks like we don't have any other questions, and we only have about 2 minutes left anyway. So I would like to offer a closing prayer, and then we will close this down. So will you pray with me? Gracious God, we do pause to give you thanks for all of the folks that have agreed to serve you and the kingdom by being caretakers and trustees of the important facilities and property and buildings that serve the United Methodist Church and their communities. Lord, I give thanks for all of those with gifts and graces and a willingness to roll up their sleeves and to help care for a building that they care about so much. I just pray that you will help us to be wise in the decisions that we need to make concerning how to use our facilities, that we might offer up our very best to you, that we might have excellent places of worship, that we might have churches that are striving to use their buildings for missional ministry, for evangelistic ministry, that will reach out to those that so need to hear your good news. And so help us to be good stewards and good servants of those properties and of the resources that we've been given. All of this, Lord, we lift up in your loving name. Amen. Again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your service in this really important role in the life of your church. I am grateful for the work that you do with the pastor and helping the pastor to live out the mission and vision of the church, as well as with the administrative team and other lay leaders in the church. So at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to you all to talk about anything that you have heard in tonight's presentation, or to handle any business that you might have to attend to tonight. So thank you very much.